Cindy, I'll look to you to let us know when we're ready to get rolling.
We're ready to go.
Okay, very good. It looks like we've got everybody here and we'll get started. This is our City of St. Helena Special City Council meeting, Monday, December 20th, 2021. And we'll roll forward. We're going to talk about the remote access. Cindy, do you have the guide on the remote access here?
Just one moment. Just share my screen. Just one moment. To participate in public comment by phone, you would dial 669-900-6833. At the prompt, enter the meeting ID, which is 883-7453-7704, and press pound. And during public comment, you would press *9 or *6 to speak.
Thank you. And my understanding is we do not have the Spanish language interpretation this evening, so we'll just move now. We do not have on the agenda the Pledge of Allegiance, but I do like to start the meetings with that. So if folks would mute your microphones and please follow with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we'll move to our roll call, please.
Mayor Ellsworth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Here.
Councilmember Chateau,
Here.
Hardy,
Here.
Paul.
Here.
Very good. We'll move to our adoption of the agenda. I'll look to a city clerk to see if there are any changes on tonight's agenda.
I am not aware of any changes, Mr. Mayor.
Very, very good. And with that, then we'll take a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Chateau,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Moving down to public comment under this being a special meeting under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the items. Each person's comment shall be limited to 4 minutes. So we'll begin. We have 2 items this evening. Our first item is item 5.1. And this is consideration and proposed approval of a resolution accepting a donation from the St. Helena Little League, where the donation is the purchase and laying sod with an estimated value of $50,000. And I'll look to our city manager or our finance director, Dr. Mitz.
I'll take the lead on this tonight, Mayor. Thank you for that introduction. The Little League has already volunteered to assist with preparing fields this year for Little League, and the opening day is March 12th, and the fields have already had some work on them, and the volunteers have decided to pivot from seeding the fields, partly with some drought considerations in mind, to sod, and that's a more expensive option. It's a faster option, and because that increases the value of the donation, according to our donation policy, we need to bring this item to you. So we've reviewed this with the mayor and the vice mayor. They are recommending acceptance of this donation, and this would facilitate the delivery of sod for these fields and help us with opening day on March 12th. And we're happy to answer any questions that you have tonight. And I see in our audience that we have the president of the Little League, Jeff Blum, available for any questions as well.
Thank you. So if Jeff is with us and would check in and perhaps give us just a little bit of an overview that would inform our conversation a bit.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. As most of you know, I've been in front of you before. The fields have kind of reached a level of disrepair out there with the gopher holes and so forth, even to the point where this past summer or fall season, the youth soccer program out there was moved to the primary field just for, basically for safety concerns. So we started a couple weeks ago. We had to wait until the first rain so we could get in there with tractors and turn the dirt over. We've turned it a couple times, but our window to seed and grow grass out there, I think, has closed. Has been the determination by, folks that know this a lot better than I do, but which left us with the option, the only option is to lay sod out there. So we've contracted with Delta Bluegrass. They did a field that I saw down in Napa that looks wonderful. They're confident that the sod can be laid. We could, we understand.
Jeff, we're having a little problem with your,
We're still under water restrictions out there. I think twice a week is what we have been told.
Jeff, we're having a little problem with your audio. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, now you seem a little clearer. And,
Yeah,
and so I think you were just
Go
going
ahead.
some of the watering that you had, that was where you were in the conversation?
Right. So we understand that we're still limited to 2 waterings a week is what I believe April informed me of as we started this project. And my rep, it would still probably take, we'd like to maybe, if we can, he said it would be better if we could extend that watering, the same amount of water out over a few extra days, maybe do it 4 times a week or something of that nature rather than twice. But
we seem to be having some problems with Mr. Blum's audio. I don't know if he can call back or where we are. To me, the watering issue is a part of this conversation. Mark, Mr. Presswich, do you, in terms of the watering schedule, and then I'll check in with Councilmember Hall in a moment. In terms of the watering schedule, what is your understanding?
Well, they are looking at some sod that is a drought type sod that is essentially a Bermuda hybrid type of grass. And it's our water restrictions under phase 2 that limit watering to 2 days per week. What we've done as an organization is we typically water 3 days a week pre the phase 2 water emergency. And what we did was turn off water one of those 2 days. Our obligations under the code to avoid penalties is to achieve a 10% reduction over a 3-year average. So because we have different meters on different water accounts that are city owned, obviously our goal is to set a good example and avoid penalties to the extent we can. And we've achieved that essentially by turning off water 1 day a week, which is about a 30% reduction in watering. It probably is not the right mix for trying to grow seed, new grass from seed. From a sod perspective, we would be limited under the current code and the current emergency to 2 days a week. But we do have some ability to adjust those 2 days per week, the amount of water that we're watering, so long as we stay under the 3-year average by more than 10%.
And from your perspective with sod as opposed to seeding, does that 2 day a week, you think we can find a way to make that work?
I think we can make it work. If there's more details that Jeff would like to share, we can try to have him back on some of the details. He's had the conversations with the manufacturer.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councilmember Hall and then Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I was just curious, Mark, if you know how many ball fields this covers. Are they playing on 3 different fields? And do they consider maybe just sodding 1 or 2 and adjusting their schedule accordingly or something like that?
That's a detail I'll have to ask our president to help us with.
Okay, thank you.
And then we'll look to Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. My question, if I heard him right through all of the bad reception, was that Jeff was asking if he can use the same amount of water, but spread it over 3 days. I don't know if he said 4 days, but the same amount of water. So is that allowed by the code, or is it really limited just to the 2 days, right? It has to be the 2 days.
Limited to the 2, right. So what we potentially could do is some water in the morning, some water closer to the end of the day on those 2 days, separated by 3 or 4 days. Try to work around the existing weather as well. So if it's raining during portions of the week, figure out other days for that watering. So I think there are some adjustments that we can work together on trying to make. And at the moment, we're in the phase 2 water emergency. If something changes on that front, that could affect this as well.
And so our decision tonight is about accepting this as a gift. And so there won't be any financial aspect put on the city.
That's correct.
So I'm seeing Jeff again with his hand up. We'll see if the audio works okay, and then we'll see if there's any additional public comment.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, now we can hear you, yes.
I think I got myself on a Wi-Fi network, so my apologies. To answer Councilmember Hall's question, it's both outfields on east and west that we're going to sod. And my understanding is the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks is where the need for water is most important. After that, it is a very hardy and drought resistant blend of seed mix. So he said, as long as we can get the ground prepared, which White Vineyard Management has been out there and done a lot of work for us already to this point, the water that first 2 weeks, and we could back off after that.
If there's a need for additional water in those first few weeks, is that something that can be arranged to be trucked in if it doesn't work with our city schedule? I'll look to our city manager. I just want to make sure that if they do the installation and they have a water need, or Jeff, would you mind muting for a moment? There we go. If there is
Those are options that we can work on, and I think having some flexibility of different times during those 2 days a week, and working with existing weather, there's a pathway there. So what they're trying to do is decide between seeding and sodding, and their thinking today is sodding is preferred alternative just given the date. And so I think we can work together at finding a way to keep the grass irrigated, but within consistent with the code.
Okay. Any other council comment before I open it for public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment.
Nancy, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Hi, this is actually not public comment. I would just like to request, in as much as this is a public meeting, that you tell us how many people are tuned in. And it would be nice if you could repeat that at the end of the meeting so that we know if more people logged on after the fact. But I do think it would be helpful for the general population that are interested in this to know how many people are actually plugged in. And secondly, if you could let the public know that there are 6 additional public comment letters that were tacked on to the staff report. So in order to view them, you'd have to go past roughly 90 pages of staff report to get to those 6 additional letters. So besides the 5 that were posted as public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Durbin. I believe that's referring to the next item.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is.
Yes.
I had my hand raised before the meeting started. Pardon me, I'm sorry. So I won't raise my hand on those two issues again, though. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I don't know if there's a protocol for letting somebody know how many folks are on the meeting. I'm not sure. I'd have to look to our city manager or city attorney on that.
I don't think we have any trouble sharing that information, and I can share with you that we have 15 attendees from the public present.
Okay. I'm seeing, and so I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
I was just going to say, before there was any discussion, I'm going to recuse myself from that next item. So to please limit it until I'm gone.
Yes, yes. So we're on the baseball field issue. We've seen if there's public comment. I don't believe there's any additional public comment. We can bring it back to the council. This is certainly something I'm supportive of. If looking at accepting this gift, if we can work out how we can do the irrigation without putting ourselves in a bad spot. Any other council thoughts here? And I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Just thank you for the gift. It's nice to have nice fields for everybody to be playing on. And yes, let's work within our limitations and not have it die. I'm so grateful it's drought tolerant. That seems like what we have to do moving forward. And it is really nice to have a good field for all of the kids to be on.
That is exciting that it'll be a safe sort of new approach here. Is there any other council comment or a motion?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Okay.
And this is the attached resolution. So is there a roll call?
Councilor Chateau,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Thank you. And thanks again for the gift from the group putting that forward. So from the Little League group. So with that, we will now move on to our next item, which is, and this is where Anna, I think we'll wave goodbye to you for this evening.
I will, and I'll just say for the public record, I'm recusing myself because my husband works at Hall Wines, and the conversation or decision and vote could have a material financial effect on their business. Thank you all. Good night and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move down the agenda here, and now we're at item 5.2. This is adoption of resolution approving settlement of Hall Vineland LLC and Hall Vista LLC versus City of St. Helena et al., Napa County Superior Court case number 19 CV 000897, including settlement agreement and water service and fire service agreements attached thereto, and finding approval exempt from CEQA. And this, I'll turn this over to our city attorney, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a follow-up to our meeting from last Tuesday. As we noted at that time, we committed to setting a special meeting so that we could discuss this item in further detail and provide some additional time for people to submit questions to the city and for us to respond to those. So we did do that. We generated through our special counsel, Kevin Siegel, who's been handling this matter for us on the litigation side, worked on a supplemental staff report to address the comment letters that we received. He did not go through each one individually, but he kept it to the general questions that we got on this matter. And that has been provided as part of the council packet this evening. I will turn it over to Kevin to see if he has anything to add beyond what he has submitted via writing. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have after Kevin provides any additional information.
Thank you. Kevin?
Would help if I took mute off. Thank you. Thank you, Ethan. What I was planning on doing was just going through the supplemental staff report to highlight those issues, just to be sure that they're sufficiently raised and questions can be asked, unless the mayor, you have something else you would prefer?
I think if you just get us started going over that, that would be the way to get going here.
That sounds good. So, and what I did is I working with the city administration, we looked through the questions that have been answered through public comments and basically consolidated them to issues and responses. And so that's what I'll address briefly now. Really, the first issue, which has come up in various ways, is whether the city is approving Paul's project for 341 St. Helena Highway. And as discussed before, and as discussed in the supplemental staff report, it is not approving that project. It's the county of Napa that has jurisdiction over land uses. The halls need to further pursue the application they had submitted or pursue an amended application. They can make their choice as to that. Whether they get to proceed with that project is ultimately up to the county to determine whether or not to issue permits. What our role is to say that if they pursue a project which is consistent with that's been described in the settlement agreement, specifically in Exhibit F, then there's the water service agreement that will apply to that. So that's consistent with city practices. A related question, which is really the second issue, is whether the city has considered the benefits and or detriments of Hall's proposed project concerning land uses, ownership or rental interest into the property. That covers, for example, whether there'll be individual limited liability corporations that will have interest in the property or to any improvements thereon, taxation issues such as transit occupancy taxes and so on. So again, what our role is as a water provider. And so we don't have authority to make decisions based upon land use issues, ownership issues, taxation issues, and whatnot. It's the question of what are the rights and obligations as a water provider pursuant to the water neutral policy and the city's municipal code. And that's the water use agreement now that is proposed to be entered that would specify an annual limitation on the amount of water that they could use, which is not presently in effect, because if they received approval for a project, there wouldn't be such a limitation, and it has enforcement mechanisms such as the surcharge, 60% if they go over the annual limitation, and also some enforcement mechanisms about requiring conservation measures. The city expressly states in the agreement, and this would be true whether it's stated in the agreement or not, the city retains regulatory authority. And by that, I mean there's a difference between contractual rights and regulatory rights. And so the water use agreement establishes some contractual rights, but it does not undo the city's regulatory rights with respect to, for example, conservation measures that the city would impose and does impose in drought times. And so those will apply regardless of what this agreement provides as far as additional enforcement mechanisms, such as the termination for non-essential uses or the surcharges. So the next issue is the water neutrality issue.
We lost your audio for a moment. I don't know if.
Can you hear me now?
Now you're good. Yep.
Okay. Thanks for the warning there. So the city did evaluate these issues pursuant to the water neutral policy and the city's municipal code. And the short of it is that it is appropriate to look at the number of bedrooms that previously existed on the site in order to establish an annual limitation. And that's provided for in the water neutral policy. And so that's what the analysis does. And that's how we got to the 2.1 million gallons per year of an annual limitation. So We aren't at liberty to disclose what actual water service was there. The city keeps that information confidential for users. But in any event, the annual limitation is established on what the entitlement would be under the water neutral policy based upon the number of bedrooms that existed at the site. And with the enforcement mechanisms that I was discussing before, I think the city can feel comfortable that it now has contractual right through the water use agreement to enforce the annual limitation that it didn't previously have. The next issue, I think I really already touched upon how the city calculated the historic allotment for the property. I've addressed that in my comments just a moment ago. The same with the issue about the consumption numbers at the property. And the next issue is really related, and that is whether the city is vesting Hall with water allocation rights. And again, the answer to that is no. Hall already had rights to use city water. The question now is, with new development, can the city impose an annual limitation? And that's what it's doing through the water service agreement, again, with enforcement mechanisms that's described as to surcharges and requiring conservation measures and termination for non-essential uses, along with, of course, the city's regulatory authority to impose conservation measures. In the future, right now, the property is considered to be residential because it has been a mobile home park. If it remains as a residential project with respect to the city's regulatory requirements in the future for drought conditions, then those would be what applies. If it becomes somehow a commercial project classification, then that's what regulatory measures would apply. This agreement doesn't affect that. Why the city provides water to properties outside city limits. Councilmember Hardy discussed this at the last council meeting. I've summarized that and added a few statements that basically explain that decades ago, the city extends outside city limits, and one of those properties is the subject property. It didn't have an annual limitation, and so what the city is doing now, as it does with other extraterritorial water recipients, is imposing proposed to adopt a water service agreement.
Kevin, if I may interrupt just for a moment, I'm seeing our city clerk's hand up. I just want to see what we have here.
Kevin, I just want to make a suggestion. Since your audio has cut in and out in your video, if you might want to just, turn off your video.
Okay. So thank you. I was noticing earlier that my internet did seem a little bit less stable today. I'm just about done. A couple more issues. Questions were asked as to the circumstances under which Hall caused the mobile home park tenants to vacate. The city doesn't have firsthand knowledge about that. It doesn't have any direct role in that process. So really no further comment about that. As far as funding, the city manager has a few words to say about that, which he'll address as soon as I'm done, which is in a moment here. How much water the winery has drawn. Again, we're not disclosing that, but we can point out that as there's a link here to the city's webpage where it shows when users that have water service agreements have gone over the annual allotments, that that information is provided. Now that we do have in hand the 2007 water service agreement and can see that the annual limitation for the winery property, not the subject property, but the winery property has dropped from 12 million gallons to 8 million gallons. Instead, the city will be updating its water compliance survey. And then, the final question is there a prohibition under Government Code 1090 to entering these agreements? And as we discussed at the last meeting, there isn't, because there's a remote interest exception under 1091 B15 of the Government Code, and that has been satisfied so the city may proceed. So that really addresses, I believe, every issue that was raised in the comments. There was one I was leaving for Mr. Prestwich, and the only other issue actually is two other issues were raised now that I'm looking at my notes. One is to Senate Bill 13. I'll just comment that was primarily a hall idea for extending sewer service, but extension of sewer service isn't part of the settlement. So while that Senator Dodd did advance Senate Bill 13 contemporaneously with the settlement discussions, it's not ultimately at issue with respect to the settlement. If the city manager has more to say about that, I'm sure he will. And then the final comment I want to address is about withdrawal of the September 25, 2018 comment letter to the planning director. That was described as a gag order or censorship. That's not what it is. It is that letter addressed two issues. One was whether the project satisfied county land use rules. And the second issue was whether the project would be served by city water. So we're withdrawing that letter, of course, but the obligation of the settlement agreement is merely that we would be in the future providing city water pursuant to the water service agreement, as long as there is a project that is consistent with these agreements. So that is the summary that we've prepared, and some additional comments to some comments that were submitted. And I think the city manager might have some additional statements to make about the funding issue.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. And we'll look to Mr. Prestwich with that.
Sure. There were also a couple of questions related to sales tax and hotel tax. And there is no element of this agreement that would provide any sales tax to the city. There were questions about whether the city would drive any hotel tax if the hall project subsequently became some form of hotel transient producing revenue instrument, and who would derive that revenue. That is because it's a county unincorporated parcel. There's no in our settlement agreement, there's no discussion of hotel tax for the city, and any project in the county, those hotel tax revenues go to the county. In terms of source of funding, the staff report notes that the general fund as well as the water fund are potential sources of funds for the settlement agreement. Both funds have adequate resources to fund. The council may want to consider some form of balance between each of those funds, so that the entire burden isn't placed on one fund versus the other. That said, the city finds itself in a unique circumstance right now, because as with our water emergency, the city has received a significant number of dollars that have come from water penalties. And the water penalty revenue, there's adequate revenue today to fund the initial payment due of $450,000. So the city has payment penalty revenue that can fund the initial year one payment. And it would be my recommendation that we do use that source of funding for the year one payment, and perhaps push out the conversation to a meeting, a regular meeting, or a subsequent budget development process meeting, or some subsequent meeting beyond tonight related to the years 2 through 6 payments. So I'm happy to answer any questions that the council has on that. You have the flexibility to use either the water fund or the general fund. And again, it would be my recommendation that you use the water penalty revenue, this one-time revenue, to make the initial payment for this initial term.
Thank you. Is there an initial council comment here, comment or question from the council on where we are? I'm seeing none. I'll look to the public to see if there's public comments.
There is. Stuart, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Yes, hi, this is Stuart Kresge, and I actually am a resident also just slightly outside of city limits. I want to thank the council for providing opportunity for public comment on this. And it does sound like the main concern for me, and I feel probably a lot of other residents, is that Hall will have the same restrictions as those of us that do, live outside of the city limits have as far as use. But the other thing that I would like to add is that I do feel that this should be held over, as there may be several people that could comment and provide relevant information that could be away for the holidays. Yeah, I just want to make sure that it is rather concerning that Hall is there, there's not going to be any sales tax derived from this or TOT tax. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Is there additional public comments?
There's a hand raised. Just a moment. Arlene, you can unmute yourself and address the council. You have 4 minutes.
Note that for a long time in law, there has been a law that said St. Helena only has authority over its city limits. And this has always been true. And so when this first came up with the halls, what I don't understand is why we ever got into litigation with them since we did not control areas outside of the city limit. So we have a great settlement now, but that settlement could have been done without litigation. I'd just like you to comment.
Excuse me, are you finished with your comment?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if she had a question or she was making a statement there. So are we seeing additional public comment?
Yes. Elaine, you can unmute yourself and address the council. Elaine, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Hi there. Thanks. And thank you all really for extending the discussion to this week, at least. It's really, really helpful. And I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the other attorney, but I want to thank him too for addressing so many of the seemingly obscure questions. I still have a big concern over the potential, what the halls are going to do with this property, because we don't know if it's going to be considered residential or commercial. And where that makes a really big difference, as everybody, all the residents of St. Helena are aware, is during the drought. We had to cut back severely, 43%, and commercial properties only had to cut back 10%. And so it makes a big difference in the water availability, whether the Hall property is going to be considered a commercial property or a residential property. And that, I think that's basically all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'm seeing Arlene Corsetti. I wasn't sure if she was cut off, or I know she stopped talking, but I don't know if we wanted to see what's there some additional thing to her comment.
She just lowered her hand.
Okay.
I'm looking to see if there's any other public comment. Oh, she raised her hand. Oh. Do you want to allow her to finish her?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if she was cut off or how that finished. So if she's wants to finish.
I'm gonna allow her to speak.
Okay.
Arlene, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I absolutely had a question. I wanted to know who decided to litigate this, since we had no standing and authority on what happened to the property outside of St. Helena other than the use of the water. We've now done a water agreement we could have done without litigation. So I want to know who decided to litigate this.
The decision in terms of how we went forward from the previous council was that there was a case here to be made, and that our authority over the water use, perhaps Mr. Hardy, who's been digging a little deeper into this, can give I'm seeing his hand up, Councilmember Hardy.
Thanks. Well, to respond to Ms. Corsetti's question very literally, it was the Halls who decided to litigate the issues. They filed the lawsuit, not the city of St. Helena. And given that, although we have a settlement agreement in front of the council for approval, that settlement agreement is not yet been.
Councilmember Hardy, we're having a trouble with your audio.
It hasn't been signed. The lawsuit hasn't. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not in my usual location, and my internet may not be so good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, very good. So I was saying that two things. I'll just repeat it all since I'm not sure how much you heard before. The Halls decided to initiate litigation. They filed the lawsuit, not the city. And speaking as an individual council member, given that the lawsuit is not yet settled and has not yet been dismissed, I, for one, think it would be imprudent for us to discuss really anything else about how the lawsuit came about. Or to put it differently, I think it would be unwise for us to characterize the city's conduct. But that's just my personal view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hardy. And then I did also see Ethan Walsh, our city attorney, with a hand up. I don't know if there was a further comment.
There was, and I was just going to answer the question as well, that the Halls initiated the lawsuit. We were a defendant. So
thank you.
So that was the reason why.
So we have, looks like we have additional public comment here.
There is. Justin, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and address the council. You have 4 minutes.
Well, I'm going to say Merry Christmas. My name is Justin Ho. I'm from American, and I think I see somebody was on a transportation. So again, Merry Christmas to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And is there additional public comment?
I see his hand is raised again.
And now I think it's gone now.
Okay, no, his hand has been lowered. There is no other public comment.
Okay, very good. We'll bring it back to.
I'm sorry. Nancy Gervin just froze.
Okay.
She just,
and first, let me say, I'm seeing Ethan's hand up, so I'll take Ethan's comment and then we'll move to Nancy's.
I was waiting until public comment was over, and then I was going to ask if you wanted me to respond to Ms. Demand's question, but I can wait until public comment is over.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to Ms. Dervin, I believe is.
Am I on?
Yes.
Nancy, you can, yes.
Hi, I submitted in writing this question, which hasn't, to my satisfaction, been answered. Can you explain to me why a will serve letter was requested in the first place in 2016 if the halls already had water service that was never discontinued. And what exactly in the 2018 letter, the city said, quote, that the letter had been based on the property owner's, quote, incorrect assumptions, unquote, about existing water use at the park, which had been vacant since 2014. So I would like to know what exactly were those incorrect assumptions that the halls had that seems to be what the basis of you guys deciding that they weren't going to be getting any further water. That's kind of trying to connect the dots here. And if they've had water all along, then why did they have a will serve letter in the first place? I'm just not getting it. And I want to say Merry Christmas too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll see if there's any additional public comment, then we'll go to Mr. Walsh to respond a little bit to those questions. I'm
I
seeing
am
no
not seeing
additional.
any other public comment.
Okay, very good. So with that, we're going to close the public comment and I'll go to Mr. Walsh to give a little clarification.
What I'll do is I'll speak to Ms. Demand's question, and then I might ask Kevin to respond to Ms. Durbin's question. But as to my read as to how our water, our drought restrictions would apply under a phase 2 or phase 3 emergency to this property is that it would be the units based on what they've described that they plan to develop there. They would be treated as residential units for purposes of that, of those requirements. They've characterized their project as a rehabilitation of the mobile home park that was existing on the property. And in our description in section or chapter 13.04 of our municipal code of residential uses, it specifically calls out mobile homes and manufactured housing as a type of residential use that's subject to the 65 gallons per day limitation that people are referring to. So I do think it would be treated as residential rather than commercial. And the reason for that is it's not so much focused on kind of the characteristics of ownership of the property as it is on the use. And we can, we've set those limits based on our ability to characterize a typical use for a residential unit like these, as opposed to commercial units, which is widely variable, or a retail shop has much different water usage than, say, a winery, for example. So we have a different approach to commercial and industrial restrictions. So it's kind of a long answer, but in response to her question, I do think those would be characterized as residential units for purposes of our restrictions during drought times. As to Ms. Durbin's questions, I think Kevin may be able to answer those better than me, since he was more involved at those early stages of this process.
I will, and if my video interferes with the audio, I'll go to stop the video. So just let me know if that looks like it's happening. It's a little hard to fully answer that question, given that the case hasn't been actually resolved. We're on the cusp of that. But what I can say fairly is that when the county was considering the application, one of the things the county asks is, will there be water? Because the county is not providing water. So they asked the city that. And the city has a provision in its municipal code that says when there's new development outside city limits, there is a need for a water service agreement. And so when that request came in, it wasn't apparent that it was actually an application for new development. And so it wasn't apparent that there was a need for a water use agreement. And so there were some, the response was the rescission once those facts became apparent. And so there were some statements made in the rescission letter. And one of them was that we need some clarification here. And another was that there needs to be a water service agreement. That's what, after that, that's when the Halls filed suit saying that rescission was unlawful. And so they made that choice. We proceeded to some litigation and we're settling along the terms that the settlement agreement provides, of course, and with the water service agreement. So that is the parameters of how we got to where we are. So hopefully that addresses the question sufficiently. But as Council Member Hardy said, we aren't really, I don't want to say too much about some of the particular details as to what transpired, but that is the broad outline of why there was a request for a will-serve letter. And once some issues came to light, why there was a rescission, and the Halls then chose to file suit, and we're now resolving the suit along, or proposing to resolve the suit along the conditions that are described.
Thank you. Are there council comments or questions here, input at this point? Is there anything additionally from Mr. Walsh or Mr. Presswich?
Nothing more from me, Mayor, unless there are questions from the council.
Okay, I'm seeing none. My initial, I had wanted this to be held over until after the holidays. That would be my preference. However, understanding from the attorneys, the time frame of what we're looking at, I'd support the idea of calling the question here. Is there any input here on the council in terms of a motion or where we are on this? I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Well, I think I'll stop my video now just so that it doesn't prove to be a problem. I remain convinced that the settlement is in the city's best interests, as difficult as the issues are. I don't think there's any question that the evaluation of the pros and cons of the settlement was challenging all the way through the process until the end. And I've certainly been prompted by the many comments we've received to re-examine my own assessment of the pros and cons of settlement. And I've reached the same conclusion after some consideration. And the thing that it was most important for me to confirm is that in terms of potential litigation outcomes, there did not and does not seem to be any doubt that we were going to continue to provide water to this property, and that we were likely to be obligated in the end to provide a volume of water consistent with the original will serve letter. I don't know that that's absolutely certain, but I think that was the most likely outcome. And so for me, the most important thing was that although I recognize that if we're just starting as of today and looking at what happens if a project is completed there, that is water that is not necessarily being used today. In terms of the history of the property and the history of the use of property, it's really part of an ongoing obligation. And again, it hasn't been easy for me to reach a conclusion in favor of settlement, but I have given it a lot of thought and I remain in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional council comments? I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I just was thinking we actually have 2 items on our agenda tonight, and the first, it's very, very clear community benefit, but we're talking about 1.25 acres of lawn that will need water, and we didn't talk much about water other than 2 days a week, but the volume of water for that grass is 3 million gallons a year. And there's a lot of benefit, obviously, for those ball fields. And I don't want to slight that effort in any regard at all. But just in comparison, the whole aspect here is just over 2 million gallons. So the ball fields actually use 50% more water than the whole piece here, at least the 2 million gallon piece. So anyway, it's just something that just struck me, and I just wanted to set some context there. I'm not saying one is good or one is bad. I'm just saying, there's a lot of focus on the whole water issue. We didn't talk that much about the lawn that we just approved. The other thing I'd like to say is the money, 950 grand. It's paid out over what will be 6 years. And if you discount those payments back to today's dollars, it actually shaves about 100 grand to $125,000 off the valuation. So it's actually a little bit lighter than it looks, simply because it's paid out over time. Again, I'm not saying that I like any of that. I'm just saying, is there any silver lining here? And maybe that's one other way to think about it. And I think those are my comments. I do want to thank again, Kevin, Ethan, Lester, Paul, for all your work in getting us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Yes, I'm going to do my video cut off there to make sure you can hear me. Councilmember Hall, am I correct in thinking that if interest rates rise, the present value calculation will change and that the discount will increase?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And then I know that the city manager spoke to us earlier about source of funds for the initial payment, I believe, of $450,000. I believe we've received a recommendation. My question about that is that something that we can respond to this evening? I'm thinking yes, since it's already been discussed, but I want to be sure that that's properly under consideration this evening, or whether it should be brought back to the council at a subsequent meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, was that in terms of structure of what Mr. Hardy or Councilmember Hardy asked?
I think it's appropriate if you want to direct staff to if you want to direct staff to use the penalty funds for the initial payment. I think that's appropriate at this time. You could do that. I would, there may be some formal step that we have to take later on in the process in terms of budgeting, but that money, I don't believe is even budgeted yet. So I think you could make that direction at this point, and we could take whatever additional formal steps we need to take further along in the process as needed.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify the water penalty monies. Those are sitting as part of the water enterprise fund today. Is that correct? It didn't come into the GF at all?
They are not part of the water enterprise fund. They're separate penalty funds.
I see.
So it's the water enterprise fund is strictly ratepayer funds that and there's requirements related to Proposition 218 and everything, and that those are reasonably related to the cost of providing the service. So the penalties are something separate and apart from that.
Ethan, are you saying that those penalties are part of what we would call our general fund?
I'm not sure that we are going to we were planning on putting them into the general fund, but there are not restrictions on use of those funds.
Okay.
In the same way that there are not restrictions on use of the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or input from council here? So in terms of if the motion were to pass, the direction to use those funds, would that come now or after that decision? I'll look to both the city manager and the city attorney.
With direction, we would prepare the necessary resolutions to appropriate money and facilitate payment of the initial payment on this settlement agreement.
So would that be joined to this motion, or would that be separate? A separate?
I think it's really at your discretion at this point. If you want to give direction at this point, we have the money budgeted either way, but if you want to give direction at this point, you can direct the city manager to take those steps. If you choose not to, it's not a requirement that you do that at this point.
Is there any input on this from the negotiating team?
This is Lester. I don't think of this as a negotiating team issue per se, but simply as another council member, I can say that I am in support of the city manager's recommendation.
Any other council comment on that? Thank you. Councilmember Hall?
I concur with Lester's comment there. I would support the recommendation from staff on how to fund the initial payment. And I guess that's about as far as we'll get tonight. We're not going to talk about the other payments, or can we include all that here and just say, let's pay all of this out of the water enterprise going forward, with the initial payment coming from water penalty funds?
So with that, I would look to our city manager. I know that that's been part of the discussion about whether the whole thing is coming from the water fund. Do you feel that that whole question can be answered tonight, or just focusing on that first aspect?
I think we can certainly receive feedback on the full amount of the settlement and the source of funds for that, and bring you actions that would implement that subsequent to this meeting. And at the moment, we have receipt of revenues that can fund the initial payment, and we're still working on the accounting necessary to understand the actual amount of resources that will come from penalties in the first 6 months of the fiscal year. So there's a lot of work right now underway with our finance team associated with the billing in November. And so we're happy to receive direction on the allocation, and the penalty dollars that have been billed to date do far exceed the amount of the settlement.
So, and once again, I'll put it to the council. If we look at this first payment, as we were looking at that from the water penalty fund, do we want to keep flexibility on the second part in sort of response to questions about which fund this is coming out of, or do we feel comfortable making a decision tonight to stay with the water fund? Looking at Councilmember Hardy.
Well, I expressed my support and made a decision about what to do with reference to funding the initial payment of $450,000, because that's an obligation that we will incur immediately. Well, I mean, the whole $950,000 is an obligation that we incur when we approve the settlement agreement, assuming that we do. So it seems to me appropriate to provide the city manager with direction on that initial payment. At the same time, I think in terms of the comments we have received from, I believe so far, 2 members of the public, we're in terms of the request that we pay all of the costs associated with the litigation out of the Water Enterprise Fund. We're talking about a decision that has significant potential consequences for water rates. And I think it would be both unwise and inappropriate to reach a conclusion and give direction of that magnitude without scheduling as a separate agenda item this subject at a future meeting, and make sure that we've heard from all of the water customers and others who might wish to comment on that subject. So to put it more succinctly, I think that decision is premature.
Thank you. I would concur with that. I think that was well laid out. I've seen Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I was just going to agree that I think having a second session on it is fine. I mean, frankly, I'm not in favor of funding out of the general fund. However, I don't want to give up the ability to fund out of water penalties. So it sounds like we can use water penalties for this initial payment. We're clear on that. We've got money available to do that. And once the finance department completes its work on that front, which sounds like maybe ongoing, we can come back to this issue and see, do we have more money there in water penalties? So I'm fine in that regard.
Okay, so I think that gives direction in terms of that second payment and holding that off, and I think that was well laid out there, unless there's any objection. So with that, Is there any other council comment or interest here in moving this forward?
I'll move approval of the staff recommendation with the direction to use the initial $450,000 from water penalties and to have a discussion about the additional payments in conjunction with our water rate analysis and further staff work on how that would affect the ratepayers.
I'll second.
And a roll call, please. Oh,
I'm sorry, who made this second?
He did.
Okay, okay. Vice Mayor Doreen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Thank you. I just have a few comments here. This has been a very, very challenging subject. I know we've all wrestled with it. I want to speak as respectfully as I can because I think that the work done by the negotiating team, by the attorneys, by the council has gotten us to a point where we're in as good a position as we can be. I am, however, concerned. I think that there remain some conflict of interest issues, some endorsement issues, some things that have, for me, clouded the water a bit. And so as we've all wrestled with this, and I think Councilmember Hardy said it's a close thing that we've all wrestled with, and I've been doing the same. But I think at this point, my vote is no, because of the sort of clouding due to some other extraneous issues. And so I think we're with a 3-1, I believe the motion passes. I want to thank everybody for their work and for the continued focus. And is there anything additional from the council? Okay. With that, we will adjourn the meeting. Happy
Thank you,
and wish
everybody.
everybody
Merry
a happy
Christmas.
holiday. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.